Stop basing your understanding of the past on historical rumors, Victorian propaganda, and lazy Hollywood screenwriting. You are navigating the world with a mind cluttered by centuries of convenient yet entirely fabricated historical facts. It is time for drastic intellectual intervention. We are initiating a complete memory wipe, discarding the academic clutter and cinematic garbage you were erroneously taught, and replacing it with the stark, often ridiculous reality. Here are 10 fundamental lies you were forced to memorize, and the ugly truth that makes the lie laughable. Number 1. The pyramids were built by slave labor. For centuries, the visual narrative accompanying the colossal majesty of the Great Pyramids has been one of whip-cracking overseers and endless lines of suffering slaves. It is the defining image of ancient Egyptian oppression. Yet this entire narrative is less Egyptian history and more Greek propaganda, specifically the faulty observation and self-serving writings of Herodotus. It is a lie so convenient that it has become permanently fused with the image of Giza. The truth demands an apology to the meticulous, organized genius of Egyptian administration. The laborers who constructed these monumental tombs were not chattel. They were highly skilled, free, paid workers who engaged in one of the earliest and most advanced public works projects. These men were essentially a professional, unionized construction workforce. Archaeological evidence unearthed in the 1990s near the pyramids confirms this. These laborers were afforded a diet superior to that of the average Egyptian peasant, including daily rations of prime cuts of beef, a protein luxury few could afford, and vast quantities of beer, which served as both hydration and a calorie source. They received sophisticated medical care for the time, and their social standing was so esteemed that they were permitted to be buried in elaborate tombs situated directly alongside the pharaohs they served. Slaves are disposable property. They do not receive gourmet protein, sophisticated labor organization, or grave sites with a view of the king's final resting place. This falsehood diminishes the organizational sophistication of the Old Kingdom and elevates a casual, ancient falsehood to the level of undeniable fact. Number 2. Nero fiddled while Rome burned. The image of Emperor Nero calmly plucking a stringed instrument while the eternal city is engulfed in a catastrophic fire is the ultimate portrayal of callous, narcissistic tyranny. It is one of the most potent character assassinations in all of history. However, the scene is not just an exaggeration, it is a chronological and technological impossibility. Firstly, the violin, or fiddle, would not be invented for another 1,000 years, making the entire visual concept ludicrous. Secondly, Nero was demonstrably not even in Rome when the Great Fire began in 64 AD. He was miles away at his villa in Antium. Upon receiving the news of the disaster, he did not revel in the destruction. He immediately rushed back to the city to coordinate the relief efforts, deploying his own funds to pay for rescue efforts and personally opening his palaces to house the newly homeless populace. Nero's historical damnation was primarily the work of his political enemies within the Roman Senate and subsequent historical chroniclers who detested his extravagant rule and theatrical persona. These opponents seized the chance to rewrite the tragedy as a spectacle of imperial indifference. This historical slander is a potent reminder that the victors may not write history, but those with access to the written word can certainly destroy a reputation, turning a somewhat effective disaster manager into a theatrical, self-obsessed pyromaniac. The tale is literally a 1,000-year-old piece of opposition research. Number 3. Medieval people believed the earth was flat. This idea that the entire span of the Middle Ages was a period of such profound intellectual stagnation that educated people feared sailing off the edge of a disc-shaped earth is one of the most pervasive and demeaning falsehoods about the era. This Dark Ages myth serves only to inflate the perceived genius of later periods. The concept that the Earth was a sphere has been accepted by the intellectual elite since at least the 3rd century BC in ancient Greece. Philosophers like Aristotle and mathematicians like Eratosthenes had not only deduced the globe's spherical nature, but had accurately calculated its circumference. Throughout the Middle Ages, theologians, astronomers, and scholars within the burgeoning university system maintained and taught this understanding. Texts used during the period, including the works of Bede and Isidore of Seville, explicitly discuss a spherical Earth. The myth that Christopher Columbus was bravely sailing to prove a round Earth is therefore not only historically inaccurate, but laughably anachronistic. Columbus was not a scientific pioneer. He was a terrible cartographer with disastrously bad math skills who simply believed the ocean was much smaller than it actually was. The flat Earth myth was largely fabricated in the 19th century by writers such as Washington Irving, who wanted to paint the preceding eras as ignorant and backward, thus creating a literary device to make figures like Columbus appear more heroic and solitary in their scientific vision. The tale is literally a 1,000-year-old piece of opposition research.
Number 5. The War of the Worlds broadcast caused mass riots and suicides. The legendary panic generated by Orson Welles' 1938 radio broadcast of The War of the Worlds, A Tale of Martian Invasion, is often cited as the ultimate proof of media manipulation and public gullibility. The standard narrative claims mass hysteria, citizens pouring into the streets, police stations being overwhelmed, and even suicides committed out of fear of the alien onslaught. This entire story is a sensationalized journalistic invention. While there were certainly some scattered reports of localized fear and confusion, mostly from late-tuning listeners who missed the disclaimers, the true magnitude of the event was minor. In reality, very few people were listening to the broadcast. The popular show at the time was Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy on a rival network. The actual listener numbers were low, and documented cases of actual sustained panic or riot are virtually non-existent. The extensive, breathless reports of widespread panic were largely manufactured by the print media, newspapers. At the time, newspapers were intensely threatened by the rapidly expanding and inexpensive new medium of radio, which was aggressively stealing their advertising revenue. By exaggerating minor confusion into a national crisis of mass hysteria, the newspapers sought to paint radio as a dangerous, unregulated, and irresponsible medium that needed strict governmental control. The panic story you learned is simply a successful 1938 smear campaign against a competing industry that has been absorbed into historical fact. Number 5. Gladiatorial combat always ended in death. Hollywood and popular imagination have solidified the image of the Roman Colosseum as a relentless, unforgiving slaughterhouse where every gladiatorial duel concluded with one participant lying dead in the sand, dictated by the emperor's fatal thumb signal. This perception fundamentally misunderstands the economics and logistics of Roman sports. Gladiators were not expendable cannon fodder. They were extremely expensive, highly trained professional athletes. These men represented a massive financial investment for the lanista, owner, who paid for their training, feeding, and upkeep. Routinely killing off star performers would be fiscally disastrous. It would be akin to a modern sports franchise executing their highest-paid quarterback after every game. Most gladiatorial matches employed a sophisticated system, complete with referees to ensure fair play. Matches frequently ended with the surrender of one combatant, and the final decision often rested on the financial calculus of the editor, the promoter, who generally preferred to save an injured but living investment. While death certainly occurred and was always a grim possibility, the vast majority of matches ended with both men walking away alive, ready to fight and earn revenue another day. The persistent image of universal blood sport is a dramatic fabrication designed to hype the brutality of the era. Number 7. Vikings wore horned helmets. The iconic, instantly recognizable image of a Viking warrior, bearded, fierce, and invariably wearing a helmet adorned with two massive, upward-curving horns, is entirely derived from a single artistic blunder, not historical accuracy. It is a costume piece, not a piece of military hardware. There is zero archaeological evidence that Viking warriors or any Norsemen wore helmets with horns into battle. From a practical standpoint, the idea is utterly ludicrous. Affixing large, unwieldy horns to a helmet provides the enemy with two perfect handles by which to grab the wearer's head, twist violently, and literally snap the wearer's neck. Real Viking helmets, though rare in the archaeological record, were simple, functional, conical, or dome-shaped iron caps designed for efficient defense. The famous image of the horned helmet was popularized in the 19th century by Swedish illustrator Gustav Malmström for the 1876 production of Richard Wagner's opera Der Ring des Nidhöggnen. Malmström wanted a dramatic, barbaric costume design, and the horns provided the visual flair. The opera's sensational success cemented this fictional design in the public consciousness, turning a mere stage prop into a universally accepted yet utterly false symbol of Norse warfare. Number 7. The Wild West was a constant barrage of violence and duels. The cinematic portrayal of the American West is one of ceaseless, chaotic violence, saloons filled with drunken brawls, cattle rustling, and regular dramatic quick-draw duels at high noon in dusty main streets. This entire premise, however, is a profound and convenient exaggeration rooted in dime store novels and subsequent cinematic narratives. The actual American West was surprisingly significantly safer than many urban environments of the modern era. Iconic towns like Dodge City, Kansas, and Tombstone, Arizona, the very settings for the most famous fictional shootouts, actually enforced shockingly strict gun control laws. Upon entering town, visitors were often required to check their firearms at the sheriff's office or the town's limits. These municipalities had a vested interest in maintaining order to protect commerce and property, meaning casual violence was heavily discouraged and punished. Quick-draw duels rarely, if ever, occurred outside of Hollywood scripts. Most conflict was resolved through less glamorous means, and most famous gunfights, like the infamous one at the OK Corral, were brief, chaotic, and messy ambushes, not stylized formal standoffs. The notion of a lawless frontier, where the six-chooser was the sole arbiter of justice, is a profitable yet utterly false romanticization of a far more mundane and regulated historical reality.
Number 8. Everyone in the Middle Ages died by age 30. The pervasive statistic that people in the medieval period had an average life expectancy of around 30 years has led to the persistent misconception that life was universally short, brutal, and that anyone surviving past their 20s was a rare anomaly. This statistic is profoundly misleading due to a fundamental misunderstanding of historical demography. The low average life expectancy figure is driven almost entirely by one devastating statistical factor: infant and childhood mortality. During this era, a staggering number of children, often up to 1/3 or more, died before reaching the age of 5 due to disease, infection, and poor sanitation. The inclusion of these 0 to 5 deaths drags the overall average life expectancy down dramatically. If a person survived childhood and reached the age of 21, their statistical chances of living to a relatively old age, such as 65 or 70, were remarkably high, even without the benefit of modern antibiotics or surgical intervention. While life was certainly precarious, the entire population wasn't dropping like flies in their 30s. The stereotype simplifies a complex demographic reality into a simple, dramatic, yet erroneous piece of trivia. Number 9. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. Thomas Alva Edison is immortalized in popular history as the singular genius who plucked the idea of the electric light bulb from pure invention and brought light to the world. The reality, however, positions Edison less as a solitary inventor and more as a brilliant businessman, patent collector, and ruthlessly effective marketer. The electric light bulb was not invented from scratch by Edison. In fact, dozens of inventors across Europe and America had designed, patented, and demonstrated various working versions of the incandescent bulb years and sometimes decades before Edison filed his 1879 patent. Among the most notable forerunners was British chemist Joseph Swan, who developed a functional carbon filament bulb in the 1960s and 70s. Edison's true genius was in refinement, endurance, and systemization. He perfected the filament material, settling on a higher resistance carbonized thread that significantly extended the bulb's lifespan, and more importantly, he created the entire electrical distribution system, dynamos, wiring, meters, and switches necessary to make electric light practical and commercially viable for homes and businesses. He bought out the patents of his rivals, consolidated the technology, and through a brilliant public relations campaign, positioned himself as the sole inventor. The lone genius narrative is therefore a highly effective piece of corporate myth-making. Number 10. Ancient statues were always gleaming white marble. When touring a museum featuring classical Greek or Roman sculpture, the statues are universally presented as pristine, elegant forms of gleaming white marble, conveying a sense of timeless purity, sophistication, and refined taste. This perception, which has defined the very aesthetic of Western classical art for centuries, is a massive and persistent historical error caused by the simple passage of time. In truth, all of these statues, temples, and architectural reliefs were originally painted in bright, saturated, and often garish colors. Imagine the Parthenon not as elegant white stone, but a dazzling canvas of reds, blues, yellows, and golds. The human figures were painted with colored skin, hair, and clothing in shades that would look gaudy, even tacky to the modern eye accustomed to the stark white aesthetic. The paint, which was often composed of organic pigments, simply faded or flaked away over the thousands of years the artifacts spent buried or exposed to the elements. When Renaissance-era archaeologists began excavating these pieces, they found them bleached white and concluded that the original aesthetic was this elegant, unpainted marble. This finding set the standard for classical art that we still follow today. The white marble aesthetic is therefore a glorious historical accident, a lie preserved by decay that completely misrepresents the vibrant, colorful reality of the ancient world. Your memory has now undergone a complete, necessary factory reset. You are no longer burdened by the historical fantasies of Victorian novelists and propaganda mills. Hit subscribe now so you never fall for this easily debunked historical nonsense again. Now we pose the ultimate challenge. Which of these 10 deleted lies do you find the most difficult to surrender? Pick the one you are most certain I got wrong and try to prove it in the comments below. Go ahead, I dare you.